Okay, so some of you I could see are getting a little bit agitated. Not really. I jokingly say that, Jerry. You still have not said how you diagnose it. The way you diagnose leaky gut, and Alan, if you could put back up again those triggers for those watching, is you start by isolating and identifying where these 9 triggers are coming from. Because these triggers are going to cause leaky gut in almost anyone who's exposed to them consistently enough over time. So there's not a great test. So if we run a test, for example, there's a lactulose mannitol test, which is a sugar absorption test. It's not real accurate. It's not always accurate to assess leaky gut. There's another test that measures in your bloodstream antibodies to something called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, which can be byproducts of bacterial endotoxins, and certain bacteria are known to create leaky gut. But these tests, look, there are a lot of reasons why you can have leaky gut. So these tests are not accurate if you run this test or that test only. It really, to diagnose and to really get an idea for whether leaky gut is going on, you have to assess whether or not the triggers are happening. So you measure for food allergies. Very critical to measure for gluten sensitivity. Important when you're measuring for gluten sensitivity to measure genetics, not to measure blood antibodies, because they're misleading. So again, let's find a little space to ID leaky gut. We test for, number 1, food allergy. And food allergy and gluten sensitivity are not the same thing. So gluten sensitivity, we want to test, make sure you get the right genetic testing done if you really want to know whether you're gluten sensitive, because it's not the same thing as a food allergy. You want to measure your microbiome. So a comprehensive gut test that measures the microbiome, and it will also, within the measuring of the microbiome, it won't just measure the microbiome, but it will measure for markers of inflammation, should measure for markers of gastrointestinal inflammation. It should measure for something called short-chain fatty acids, which are the fuel source for your gut. It's how your gut cells create energy so that they can make new cells to replicate themselves as they get old. Remember, your gut lining repairs itself every 2 to 7 days, so it's a relatively quick healer if you can rule out all of the different triggers. But you want to measure, again, your microbiome. You want to measure inflammatory markers. You want to measure for things like abnormal bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, worms, or parasites. You want to measure for things like yeast overgrowth. These are all important to rule out because they're all parts of the trigger. So again, you also, I mentioned earlier, if you're on medications, like many of you are taking, for chronic pain, I see it all the time. People with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and ankylosing spondylitis come in and they're on a number of either steroids or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or immunologics, immune suppressing medications, and even asthma medications. The steroids for asthma medication and the antihistamines and the anti-leukotriene medications like Singulair and Benadryl, etc., suppress the immune system, and those can have a profound impact on the gut and gut permeability. So those medications need to be, you need to have a doctor go through them with you, look at what is absolutely necessary and what is not. And if you're struggling, you need to work on a plan with your doctor to wean yourself away from those medications slowly or as necessary to make sure that you're removing the ones that we know can trigger gastrointestinal damage or alter the microbiome. So that becomes a very, very important part of this process. So again, you're measuring the predominant triggers or the primary triggers. Now, there are certain things like, for example, processed food, processed sugar, we know is going to cause leaky gut. You shouldn't eat it. There's a rule in nutrition. You can't get healthy eating food that isn't healthy. So that should be your litmus test before you put anything in your body, anything in your mouth. You should ask yourself that question and answer yourself honestly. A lot of people just lie to themselves. Oh, I can do it today. I can get away with it. And you really can't. When you're trying and you're struggling with chronic illness, you really can't get away with it. You've got to be diligent to get this repair mechanism working, to get this recovery going. So you want to measure food allergens. You want to measure chemicals. I like to measure food additives. I like to measure other chemicals that people can be exposed to through the air or through water, because those can also be triggers for leaky gut. You want to rule out infection in the GI tract. You want to make sure the microbiome is intact, so you want a test that can measure the microbiome. And you also want to make sure that you're looking at the other environmental triggers. Again, external chemicals that could be potentially in the perfumes that you're using, or chemicals that you're maybe putting on your body, your soaps, your detergents, your shampoos, your cosmetics. Those things can leach through and create disruption in the immune system that can contribute to intestinal permeability. So you want to measure all those things, because it's all of those things that trigger the leaky gut. So if you know what you have going on, then you can then address what is unique to you. See, a lot of people think about leaky gut as this one entity or this one problem that is singular in nature and has, one reason that it exists, but it has multiple reasons why it can exist. So you can't just run a simple test that's going to tell you, yep, you have leaky gut, because it can be caused for too many different reasons. So you have to look at all the triggers simultaneously if you really want to identify what your leaky gut is being caused by and how to assess your leaky gut as an individual. Again, I can't overemphasize that enough, because so many people come to see me. They've been on leaky gut protocols and programs. They've done bone broth. They've done superfoods, and they're still struggling. And the reason they're still struggling is because they never had anyone look at the triggers. And again, those triggers, why I created that comprehensive diagram for you. And depending on which one we have up, there are references underneath that diagram. Again, for those of you who are nerds and like to read more and really like to get the science, that's there. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.